morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to participate to this training session, and I would like to talk about monitoring soil health in the framework of the future EU Soil Directive that gathers us today, and to present you some lessons learned and recommendations from AJP Soil. And I'm very glad that Agnieszka and Gregor made a presentation. Agnieszka went through all the indicators, so you have solid background and for my presentation. So thank you very much. So in the soil monitoring and resilience directive proposal, as was already presented by Jose, there are different chapters, and one concerns monitoring and assessment. That's the one that gathers us today. And to go forward, what you need is to agree upon and to have solid background. And there's a need for some flexibility across countries, of course, regarding the sampling strategy, regarding the indicators to be selected, regarding setting targets and thresholds, and for that to proceed, supporting soil data as a common good is needed. So these are the different aspects I will go through in my presentation. Before talking about sampling strategy, I would like to tell you that, yes, maybe I should remind that the AJP Soil is a European joint research program that gathered 26 partners from 24 countries, and we had activities related to concerning knowledge development, knowledge sharing and transfer, knowledge harmonization and storage, and knowledge implementation, in particular, knowledge implementation in policy. So we are very much involved in the preparation of the Soil Monitoring and Resilience Directive proposal. So in the AJP Soil, we did a number of stock takes. Stock takes are inventories of the state of play in Europe on a number of questions. And for example, we performed a stock take on the existing national soil monitoring programs. And what we found is that 19 countries have soil monitoring systems in Europe that they differ a lot regarding the frequency of sampling, regarding their age, regarding the indicators being measured, regarding the layout, whether you have a grid system, whether you have a stratified representative set of sites or a mixed system, regarding the sampling depth, for example. So there's a diversity of background, of existing situation. So a number of countries do not have existing soil monitoring system. For example, Portugal, and I know that there are participants today from Portugal. They are thinking Portugal to set one. So of course, the law proposal will orient the way they set their national soil monitoring system. But for other countries, we asked also to responsibles of this monitoring system, national soil monitoring system, whether they were ready to change the system. And the general answer was that they were really willing to harmonize, but not to change the system, because there's a whole legacy, there's a whole capital of data acquired. So one idea that we really pushed in the development of the soil monitoring law is to integrate national soil monitoring systems. And it was also the idea of in fact, of DG Environment. So now the soil monitoring and directive proposal really is made to be able to integrate as much as possible the existing national soil monitoring system. Still, there's a number of issues to deal with. Sampling, indicators, target and thresholds, and accessibility of the data. So regarding the sampling strategy, one thing that we did was comparing results obtained with Lucas Soil. Lucas Soil is the de facto European reference, and national soil monitoring systems. And we did that for 12 national soil monitoring systems. We first compared the spatial distribution of sites between Lucas and between national soil monitoring systems. So that's what under the acronym of SIMS. And you have two examples here. France and Germany. The darker blue is the surface area you see. The lower point density exists. And you see that, for example, for France, it's very different. The pattern, the spatial pattern of colors is very different, because in France, we have a grid system. In Germany, they have a, they do not have a grid system, but you see that the pattern of sampling density is also very different. Does this matter? Yes, it does matter. If you have a look at land cover representativity, this is what I represented here for the 12 countries that participated to this exercise. What you have is you have LS is Lucas soil, then you have two samplings of Lucas soils, then the national soil monitoring system, and the reference is Lucas land use. And you see that what it depicts is the proportion of sites under a different land use. In fact, when comparing national soil monitoring system with the reference of Lucas, we found that in a number of situations, the national soil monitoring system were closer to the reference. That's what is in red, in green, excuse me. But in some cases, the Lucas soil, that is the European system for soils, is closer to the reference in terms of land use. But overall, what appeared is that there's a tendency to overrepresent cropped cropland. In particular, Lucas soils really overrepresents cropland and underrepresents forest land use. Again, does this matter? Yes, it also impacts soil types representativity. Here, what you have on the graph are, you see the different soil types, ambrisols, technosols, tachnosols, and a few examples from Belgium, for Germany, Denmark, and Estonia. And you see that compare both national soil monitoring system and Lucas compared to the European soil map do vary in terms of representation of different soil types. And the general trend is that Canby soils are absolutely overrepresented, especially in Lucas soil. Again, what are the consequences? Then we had a look at soil properties distribution. And we considered a number of indicators proposed in the soil monitoring directive, as was presented by Agnieszka. And we found significant differences in organic carbon content, in pH, and in clay content distribution for many member states between the national soil monitoring system and Lucas soil. And we focused on one indicator, one of the indicators of soil organic carbon loss in the soil monitoring directive. And here you have a comparison of the proportion of sites that are, according to soil monitoring law, degraded, moderate situation, good situation, very good situation, for 4 countries, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, and Sweden. And you can see that, for example, and you have Lucas soil and national soil monitoring system for each country. You can see for Italy and Sweden, fairly or less the same distribution. That's okay. But look at the Netherlands and Poland. The national soil monitoring systems predict much less degraded situations than the Lucas soil. So if Lucas soil was implemented as the reference, there would be a problem very likely in these countries. And this happens also for other countries. So the sampling design does matter. It has influence on how you represent land cover, how you represent soil types, and on the soil properties distribution, and then how you will decide that a given soil unit within a different administrative unit is degraded or not. So comparing results obtained with Lucas soils and national soil monitoring systems, so we found a series of lessons learned. In particular the need to better cooperate between the national networks and local soil networks and between the different European networks to increase the accuracy of the soil data monitored. It would be really a pity not to consider the legacy of all these national or regional soil monitoring systems. Also, this will require working on a combination of existing data sets, and we are working on using scoring functions to mix results from Lucas soil and from national or regional soil monitoring systems. And we're working also on building transfer functions from one data set to another. And regarding sampling, and you have all this described in a policy brief that we issued recently. I will give you at the end the reference on how to access to all these policy briefs. But regarding sampling strategy, one thing that was, from what I know, first ever happening is that under Belgian presidency, the Belgian presidency had to deal with sampling protocols proposed by GRC for the soil monitoring directive and asked AJP Soil to provide capacity building to national experts in charge of implementing in the future the soil monitoring and resilience directive if accepted. And this really was, so this was performed for 20 countries. So I guess several of you, your country was participating to that. Maybe some individuals among you were the ones testing the sampling designs. But this is really, so in the end, the consequence was modifying the sampling designs in the soil monitoring directive proposal. But this is a very good example, I think, of capacity building, joining forces between countries, research programs, and the GRC, the Commission, and the presidency. Also, what we're doing as a second step, after acknowledging this importance of the sampling design, is that we have performed with Lucas Soil a double sampling exercise, so in collaboration, close collaboration with GRC, and the idea is to validate, to test and validate sampling transfer functions. So we tested the sampling design, but we also samples sampled by GRC are being analyzed by their own lab and by national labs to see whether there are differences in results for a given method. So you see, it's comparison Lucas member states. So more to tell you later. Now, regarding indicators, next step. So Agnieszka presented the different indicators presented in the soil monitoring directive. Here, as a summary, is we analyzed all those indicators. We analyzed others as well, classical indicators, and we provided critical assessment. And in many cases, we agreed with what is proposed in the soil monitoring directive. And you see this in green: pH, electrical conductivity, etc. In some cases, we agree, but not fully. And in particular, for organic carbon content, as was presented by Agnieszka, we disagree with the organic carbon to clay ratio. We can come back to that in the discussion if you want. And but think that if it's monitoring organic carbon loss, the loss has to be monitored, not contribution to aggregate stability. And in some cases, we strongly disagree. We think that carbon exchange capacity has to be added. We disagreed with available water capacity. We rather think, as Agnieszka insisted, that infiltration rate and permeability should be added. And regarding biodiversity, actually, we disagreed with the first version because respiration is only an indicator of functioning. And we proposed, I will develop a wider set of indicators, and now it's open in the revised version. So for biological indicators, we proposed a two-tiered system that countries should also have to choose. The minimum set would be one indicator, one functional indicator, and one structural indicator. Agnieszka presented you the difference. And we proposed which ISO or other norms to use, and qualified them and made a cost estimation. And we actually found, so you see here there are 7 indicators proposed, but the idea is to have at least, the minimum would be to have 1 in each category. So even if you use the 7, our estimates show that it's less than 1,000 euro per sample. And again, we summarized these findings and discussed them in the perspective of the soil monitoring law in a policy brief that is accessible. Regarding these biological indicators, maybe I will not develop much for time constraints, but we tested their sensitivity to management options such as tillage and fertilization, and found that they have contrasted sensitivities. So actually, this is one of the reasons why it is good, if the country can, to use these 7 tier 1 indicators. Tier 2 would be you want to measure even more indicators. So of course, you have a better assessment, but it costs more. Also, regarding this measurement of indicators and regarding using the data from countries, one of our stock takes was also to inventory which method was used in the different countries. And this is what is measured, what is represented in this graph, and you can find in a paper. No need to go in detail, but here for organic carbon, pH, trace elements, and particle size distribution, for each of these indicators, a different color means a different method. So you see, we're not well harmonized so far. And this is also, we really have to develop transfer functions. We really need them so that we can integrate all the know-how of the different countries and integrate all the legacy of measuring these indicators previously. And regarding soil monitoring indicators in general, we also suggested adapting frequency to the type of indicators, that the sensitivity is not the same for soil organic carbon and for biological indicators, for example. So 5 years looks like a good compromise, but for some other variables, for example, carbon, it could be extended because 5 years is really the minimum to measure changes. Whenever possible, to sample both topsoil and subsoil. And again, Agnieszka showed you for some degradation, subsoil is absolutely essential. And be very careful about the sampling period. So biodiversity, you should not sample in winter or in summer, but in periods where the climate is more favorable to biological activity, and not sample, this is very important, just after a management intervention. If you just apply pesticide, if you just tilled the soil, you change the values of the indicators, and they may not reflect the baseline value for this plot. So there's a need of the teams doing the sampling to contact with owners prior to sampling to avoid this. And what we found is that the estimated cost per location would be between 1,000 and 2,500 euro. So it's a lot, and it's not a lot, depending on what you compare to. Then, and Agnieszka presented actually this graph, we focused on how to set targets and thresholds. Of course, we are in the HAP soil, I didn't tell you, but we focus on agricultural soils. But here, the reasoning is really valid for all land use. And this is a work we did within HAP, but also with the benchmarks and AI for soil projects, Mission Soil project that we invited to our workshops and to the reflection and to participating to a paper. So as Agnieszka presented, an optimal target is a desirable value to reach. A critical threshold is a value above or below which soils are considered to be degraded, and then where specific intervention is needed. In the literature, we inventoried 4 approaches for setting targets and thresholds. The first one is using fixed values, using published and robust values that are fit for purpose. So the available information validated by the scientific community is very important. Natural reference is using, as was presented by Agnieszka, a reference under a desirable situation. For example, permanent grasslands for organic carbon stocks. Distribution is, well, you have quite a lot of data. Then you can use the statistical distribution of your data to set targets and thresholds. I will show you an example afterwards. And relative change is really a different approach. It is considering that what you want is a given temporal variation of the value of your indicator. So, for example, if we refer to the 4 per mil initiative, that desired change is increasing by 4 per mil, but at least not decreasing, so organic carbon contents and stocks. So we discussed the advantages and drawbacks of these different approaches, and we applied them to 3 countries, 3 regions in Denmark, Italy, and to mainland France. And I will present you the results. So it's for carbon, I should have said it. For the fixed approach, we use the values that were presented by Agnieszka, and you see target and threshold values. So when it is in red, it means that the soils are either below the threshold, intervention is needed, or for the target that you're not still at the optimal value. You see, so we obtained different distributions. Of course, the surface area is not the same for target and for threshold and target. Now, then we applied the reference approach. We took permanent grassland as a reference. And you see that the spatial distribution, while the numbers in terms of surface area are not the same with the previous approach, but the spatial distribution is more or less the same. Here we encountered one problem, and it's one of the limits of the reference approach, is that there were no permanent grasslands in the Jutland, in the area of Denmark that we used for the test. Then we had to take temporary grassland as a reference. So to use the reference approach, you need references in the pedoclimatic context. Then we used the distribution approach. So we set the thresholds at 12% and the target at 87%. Again, you see here that the surface areas are not the same. And in some cases, the spatial distribution is not the same. It was the case, for example, for France, for the threshold value. It's very different from what we obtained with a fixed and reference value. So different approaches, you have different number of sites that are considered to be degraded or healthy. It doesn't mean that there's one approach necessary that is the good one. It depends on the available references you have. And I will not comment in detail, but what we proposed is a framework to guide to choose the most appropriate approach, given whether robust values exist, whether you have a reference value, whether there's sufficient data available. So again, this is available if you need, and there's also a policy brief. I didn't put it here. Last point is what is needed for the soil monitoring and resilience approach. It will rely a lot. Monitoring soil health in the different countries of European Union will mobilize much data, and in particular data for setting those target and thresholds value to be able to, because you need to compare to something, whatever the, in particular, if you have the reference approach or if you have the distribution approach. So what is needed ideally is data sets obtained in any case, national data sets or research projects like Mission Soil research projects or AJP soil results go to repositories, permanent repositories, either national ones or the one like or Zenodo. And then, so then they could be both the data and the metadata could be used by USO for, in particular for the dashboard. For that, capacity building is needed. And we proposed a wiki with guidance on soil data provisioning options. Standardized machine-readable definitions and vocabularies are needed. We're not harmonized yet in Europe. So code lists were proposed by AJP Soil, and you need to harmonize formats. And we propose a geo package based on INSPIRE Soil. It is INSPIRE compliant for soil data exchange between projects, between regions, between countries, between your different data set collection, because you have different sources in each country, and you need to have access to data. And for the access to data, what we did is that we developed a metadata soil catalog. In this metadata soil catalog, so you have access to the information on a large set, more than 600 data sets. There are national data sets that were provided, the access to metadata was provided by country representatives. There are SDAC data sets, and there are AJP soil data sets issued from our research projects and our activities, diverse activities. So this is a metadata catalog, means that it's not the data catalog, but you can see what are the characteristics of the data, and then you can contact the data holder if you need to have access really to the data. And what has been done is, so that AJP Soil is finishing now, is that this metadata catalog has been taken up by one of the Mission Soil project, the SoilWise project. And in the end of the SoilWise project, it's a 3-year project, it will feed the European Soil Observatory, but you can already use it if needed in your activity. Where can you access all this information I presented to you? We have developed an interactive PDF. You can access it on our website. And here, the idea is to provide you a link towards our scientific articles, towards our public deliverables, towards our policy briefs, data sets, training and capacity building material. And we also have knowledge snack cards for wide distribution of knowledge. And it is organized per general theme. These were the themes of our wide research programs, so sustainable soil management, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, soil information assessing and monitoring, and fostering adoption. So clearly, related to this talk, the information can be found in the topic Harmonized Soil Information, Data and Monitoring Systems under the theme 4. So do not hesitate, get access here. And then I will conclude by presenting you some take-home messages. So harmonized monitoring is absolutely essential, especially in the perspective of having and implementing, transposing in each country a soil monitoring directive, and much effort is still needed for that. But we really have to value the existing. Sampling strategy matters. It affects the representativity of different land users, soil types, and in the end, it affects the value of the parameters of the indicators you have selected. And sampling should, there are other, we discuss also frequency, depth of sampling. We propose an opinion on the soil monitoring and soil monitoring and resilience directive proposal indicators, and we proposed a tiered system for biological indicators. And we think that setting realistic and adaptable targets is crucial. So the approach, hopefully the approach will help in each country to set those targets so that it's achievable, because otherwise, if we have very high targets that are not reachable, it also fuels the citizen contempt against laws and norms. We see that now in Europe. And data management must support open access and policy use of the data. And this is for all the benefit of all of us as scientists and as citizens. And on that, I would like